Hello and welcome to another episode of Naturally Adventurous. This is podcast number 10. We've made it through 10 episodes, which I'm pretty proud of. This is Charlie Hesse and I'm joined by my good friend Ken Behrens.
Hi, folks.
I'm in Thailand. Hi, folks. I'm in Thailand. He's in Madagascar. Today, also last week, we had a great podcast about life in Thailand, which is where I live. And this week we're gonna flip it back to Ken, who lives in Madagascar. So we're gonna talk about all things Madagascan. So Ken, I've been leading tours to Madagascar for about 10 years. You a little longer. I've spent a lot of time in this country. Know it pretty well, but about the only Westerner that seems to know it better than me is you. So I'm keen to hear about some new stories, but I'd like to hear first, or I'd like you to tell people how you ended up in Madagascar, how you ended up living there.
Yeah, sure thing. Though one important point, first off, no one says Madagascan except Brits. Everyone else says Malagasy, and Malagasy people themselves really say Malagasy. It's a funny thing. I don't know where this adjective Madagascan came from. How did I end up here? We did that episode about moving to South Africa a couple weeks ago. We both at different points moved to South Africa. And so I was based there for a few years. And I think maybe in my second year of working for tropical birding, they sent me to Madagascar to learn Madagascar. And it really blew me away just how different it was than Africa as I had experienced it, the parts of it I had experienced at that point, or you might say stereotypical Africa. Madagascar is really just a different world. I didn't expect how different it would be at that point. I hadn't done a ton of research or reading about the place, and I just found it fascinating. And I also had this weird feeling that I could live here.
Oh, really?
I did, yeah. Even Tana, which is this big city, it's pretty rough around the edges. I quite liked it right off the bat, and which, I wouldn't have said that about any other African city that I saw at that point, Nairobi or whatever, even Johannesburg. So, yeah, I had this weird feeling, and then that sort of came true a couple years later when I met my future wife here in Madagascar. And I was right at this juncture where I was just about to move to Asia, and so plans changed. And I ended up moving here, and we got married, and I've been based here now for almost 9 years. It's hard to believe.
Is it that long?
Yeah, I guess it's about 8 years now that I've lived in Madagascar, better part of a decade. It's crazy how time flies. And so, I lived in the capital for a couple years, and then I did get tired of it. I'm not a big city person, and it's a big developing country city. It's got a lot of hassles, a lot of traffic, a lot of pollution. And so my wife and I and our kids, we moved to the northern tip of Madagascar, to this town, which is called Diego Suarez, which makes you feel like this might be a kind of Spanish-speaking place, which it absolutely is not. It's very...
It doesn't sound very Malagasy name, really.
Not Malagasy and not French either. So this was a former French colony. It was colonized by the French for... the better part of a century, and I guess some of the first Europeans to arrive up here were a couple of Portuguese admirals, or at least they called themselves admirals. They were probably pirates or something, but Diego and Suarez. So that's where I live, at the northern tip of this big island.
When you first decided to move out there, I really wasn't very envious of you, because Tana really isn't a place that I could ever see myself living. It's just it's that sort of, it's like too bustling, and that you get a lot of hassle, and it's all, it just doesn't seem a very relaxing place to live. But then, and I actually haven't been to it's on my list of things to do, is to go and visit Ken where he lives now, but it's not a place that's on our tours that we visit on our tours. It's a little bit off the beaten track, but it does sound quite a cool place.
Yeah, I think you and your family would love it here. To me, it's by far the most sort of livable place in Madagascar.
We did a little thing with my family. We all wrote down on a piece of paper where the country that we most wanted to visit, and number one on my wife's list and on my son's list was Madagascar.
Cool.
So we are. It is on our list of things to do to come and visit you, and I certainly won't be taking them to any of the places that I've been a dozen
Over and
times
over
on
again
tours.
on the yeah.
Oh, yeah. I do love Madagascar, but just going to the same places again and again, it just wear a little thin. So I'm very excited to visit some new places. So I believe there's a big mountain nearby you, the Amber Mountain, right?
Right. So from my house, I can see there's two big mountains that dominate the northern tip of Madagascar. There's Amber Mountain, which is covered in rainforest, and there's Montagne des Français, which is covered in dry forest, dominated by
Wow.
baobabs, and it's like that. It's sort of western deciduous forest. So most of the island, the east is humid, and the west is dry, and here it's flipped. So you've got the rainforest to the west and the dry forest to the east, and I can see both from my house. And there are
Wow.
multiple endemic reptiles and amphibians on both of these mountains. They have completely different sets of animals and plants. So yeah, it is a very diverse place. Unfortunately, not a ton of birds up here and no endemics, so we don't come here on the tours. But biologically, a really interesting part of the island.
There was one, I believe. There was an Amber Mountain rock thrush, wasn't there, that I was quite keen to see, but they went and lumped it. So
You know what happened with that, Charlie?
what happened?
It was one of the few Malagasy birds I hadn't seen, and like when I moved to Africa, it was considered a full species, Amber Mountain rock thrush. Oh,
Yeah.
it looks so cool! It's beautiful. And 1 month after I moved to Diego, it was lumped with the forest rock thrush. So I really didn't particularly care, but there was some irony of that timing.
First time that that Madagascar came on my radar. When I was guiding in South America, I guided some real world travelers, world bird listers. They'd been like everywhere. They'd seen like 8,000 species of birds, and I asked them, of all the places you've been to, what's your favorite? And they said, without a doubt, Madagascar. And I was like, what? And I said, why? And they just said it is so different from anywhere else. And when I went for the first time, I saw that, and that is the thing that really stands out in Madagascar. That it's just a world apart from anywhere else.
Yeah, we often call it the eighth continent, and that's a really good description of it because it's totally different than any other place, and it has almost a continent level of biodiversity. For birds, it's relatively low diversity, although super high endemism. But for some things like plants and reptiles and amphibians, it has almost a continent level of diversity. It's just insanely diverse. So my wife actually owns a tour company here, which is called Eighth Continent Expeditions.
Was it you that gave her the idea for the name, or did she think of that one?
It was probably me. I'm not sure. She'll probably tell me I'm remembering that wrong, but.
Sometimes you'll see like a little animation of how all the tectonic plates, split, and all the continents split, Gondwana and stuff like that over millions of years. And then when you watch that, you'll see this little shape of Madagascar getting sort of separated quite early, and then all the other stuff came kind of splitting off later on. So it's really been on its own for so long.
Right, so it was connected with the Indian subcontinent and with Antarctica and maybe even to South America via Antarctica more recently than it was to the African mainland. So, long isolation and then it split a long time ago from India as well, and so very isolated, but it's also a big island. You have extremely isolated islands that are small and that are so isolated that almost nothing can colonize them. Madagascar, you're close enough to the African mainland and even to India that there's lots of colonization happening here. And then you get sort of what happened on the Galapagos, where you get this one finch that colonizes and it finds all these niches vacant, and then it just evolves into massive diversity to fill all these different niches. You see that here in Madagascar on a crazy scale. It's like one of the things I think about is what if Darwin had come here? I mean, it would have blown his mind. He probably would have cut years off the time it took him to figure out some of this stuff, because he just would have had so many more examples of evolution in process.
So one of the fun things to think about with the Madagascar wildlife is where all the different groups came from, because they're not all from the same place. They haven't all come by the same path.
Same place or same time. There was with frogs, I think there were 5 different colonization events And they were tens of millions of years apart, as I remember. Some people call it a laboratory of evolution. That's a good description.
Yeah. One of my favorite stories is how the lemurs arrived in Madagascar. Maybe you want to
No,
tell everybody about that.
You should tell your version of the story. I'll tell you if you got it wrong.
Well, you're probably going to tell me I'm wrong. Yeah, you can tell me, you can correct me. But I guess in Africa you'll see things like bush babies and galagos and things like that, and some of these they can store fat in their tails, and some of them can like hibernate or go a bit dormant for months on end. And I guess what is Madagascar from the coast of Mozambique? Is it 500 kilometers or?
I think it's 180 miles, which is what, 260 kilometers or something like that at the closest point. Although it's mostly
at the
farther
closest
away.
Point, right? But people say that in some of these big rivers like the Limpopo and the Zambezi and stuff like that, you get a lot of debris being washed out, and they form these little floating islands of vegetation. And one of the theories, which seems to make sense, is that maybe like a pregnant female galago sort of landed on one of these floating islands of vegetation and just got pushed out to sea. And of course, it didn't happen. It didn't have to happen many times, But if this thing just got pushed out further and further, and people see these floating islands like way out into the sea, and if one of them got to Madagascar, then this primate could then get on there and then sort of start reproducing and then sort of radiate into all these different niches, because the lemurs are quite a lot more primitive than the sort of higher monkeys which you find in Africa. There's no regular monkeys on Madagascar, right?
Right, they're prosimians like the bush babies or the galagos.
When you see monkeys in Africa, how sort of kind of vicious and violent and naughty and just fighting and then you look how gentle these lemurs are. I mean, I've had these things where lemurs have come close and they're just so sort of gentle and inquisitive. And then you look at these monkeys just running around, just causing havoc.
Hurling caca at you from the trees.
Oh God, they're dreadful. And the lemurs, I don't think would last 5 minutes with those monkeys, with those primates from Africa.
No, and just the array of predators that you have in Madagascar as well, and even the snakes. And so, it's one thing about Madagascar is this remarkably benign island in terms of the number of things that can kill or injure you. Whereas Africa is the place that has more of those things than anywhere else. Madagascar is like the soft and benign rainforest. There's very few dangerous things, very few predators, and I think the people are also, they don't persecute wildlife a lot. There's a lot of traditional fadis or taboos against killing different kinds of animals. And so there also hasn't been a lot of persecution from the human side, unlike a place like New Guinea. And in combination, this has resulted in remarkably tame wildlife. I mean, there's nowhere else in the world where you can be in rainforest and just see so much wildlife. There's never a dull moment when you're in the forest in Madagascar. You're always seeing something. Because I just think the wildlife is far more conspicuous and less shy. I mean, the Amazon is loaded with incredible stuff, and you just don't see most of it most of the time.
In Madagascar, as me being a pretty serious birder, the first time that I went there, I was just totally focused on the birds and seeing all the birds. But there's very, very few people, hardcore birders even, that go to Madagascar and are not completely enchanted by the other wildlife. And a lot of birding tours that we lead are just a birding tour. You see the birds, and you might get one or two mammals or point out one or two plants, but it's actually very difficult to lead a tour in Madagascar as a birding tour. Almost any tour becomes like a sort of natural history tour, and that's one of the things that makes it really fascinating.
Yep. Why would you even want to do a pure birding tour here, really? And my take on this is that you don't lose out on anything by looking at everything. Your bird tally really ends up just about the same either way, and you might as well just take in all the wonders of Madagascar.
I sometimes have a bit of a hard time explaining this to hardcore birders, because you do get the odd ones that they don't want to miss any endemics and they must see every single bird. And I tell them at the beginning, we're going to look at other stuff. You're not going to miss it. Looking at other stuff is not going to make you miss any birds. Okay, we're going to be in one forest. There's going to be 3 endemic birds, and we're going to look at those, and we're going to look at everything else as well. And then you sometimes see this kind of panic, that when you're looking at a frog or a reptile or a plant, they just think, oh no, we're missing these birds. It's like, trust us.
No, I mean, oftentimes you're hanging around a troop of lemurs and watching them for 20 minutes, and then you bump into a feeding flock of birds, and then you catch up with whatever your bird target was as well. There's no real loss there. You're just as likely to find what you're looking for usually in the area where the lemurs or the chameleons are.
And there's just an incredible, as well as the lemurs, there's all these little kind of hedgehog type things, these tenrecs, and there's a whole bunch of other interesting stuff, Malagasy carnivores and really fascinating things. I mean, on a sort of birding tour, sometimes you aim for like 200 bird species, but you'll be, we were seeing, maybe on a full tour where you visit all different parts of the island, up to like 30 species of lemurs and all sorts of other mammals, and like over 50 reptiles and butterflies and frogs, and it's just it's almost like a bio-blitz.
Yeah, it is. I think it must, in terms of a natural history tour, it must have the most evenly spread list in terms of you're racking up big numbers across a whole bunch of major groups without just focusing on one, just doing general naturalist stuff.
Yeah, it's really an amazing trip, and of course, you might want to tell people about your book here. Ken's written a fantastic book about the wildlife of Madagascar.
Yeah, that's right. I co-authored, along with Keith Barnes, a guide to the wildlife of Madagascar. Came out from Princeton and Wild Guides a couple years ago, and it covers everything, not every single species, but it covers virtually everything that you'll see on a typical natural history or birding tour to Madagascar. It's a photographic book, and yeah, it's been well reviewed. People seem to like it. So even if you're not going to come here, it'll give you a good overview of the riches of Madagascar, including lots of stuff that is normally neglected and that people don't know about.
Yeah, there's like cool insects and a whole bunch of butterflies. There's very few other books actually going to show you any pictures of butterflies from Madagascar. That's one of the things I really like about it.
Hey, one thing I was going to mention, you just mentioned Malagasy carnivorans and tenrecs. And then you were talking about how the lemurs arrived here by rafting in some kind of tree that probably washed down some big river. What blows my mind is that, so there's 4 major lineages of Malagasy mammals. There's lemurs, tenrecs, Malagasy rodents, and the carnivorans. And genetic evidence suggests that every one of those, which now represents almost 200 species, was started by a single representative, like a single species that rafted its way over from Africa or whatever, and then created a whole family or subfamily of organisms. And to put this in context, lemurs, there were these gorilla lemurs that are now extinct, but the biggest ones, they were the size of a gorilla. Or there were these sloth-like lemurs that weighed like over 100 pounds. And then on the other end of the size spectrum, you have Madame Berthe's mouse lemur, which is the smallest primate on Earth. And this entire range of lemurs all evolved from one progenitor. It's just incredible. It's 5 different families, including the ii, which is this totally bizarre animal. Just amazing what evolution can do with time and empty niches.
Yeah, it's an incredible trip. And as well as a great variety of wildlife that you can see, the sort of the scenery and the habitats also, they differ quite a lot in Madagascar, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So you have 3 major zones. You have the eastern rainforest zone, you have a western sort of dry deciduous forest zone, and then you have the spiny forest, which is really better called sort of spiny scrub in the southwest, which is a semi-desert habitat. So I think that's part of why it's so diverse, is because it's not just all rainforest like some tropical islands. It's got these 3 totally different biomes with their own sets of endemics.
That spiny forest is often one of the favorite places of people to visit. I mean, when you're walking through this thing, it's like nothing you've seen before. These huge baobab trees and these like spiny kind of cactus-like octopus trees, and it's just it's just an incredible place just to walk around, even before you talk about what you're going to see.
Yep, I often say if you were coming up with this set for a really high budget, sci-fi film, you would come up with something like the Spiny Forest. Like, this clearly isn't Earth. This is another planet.
So we've talked a little bit about the wildlife of Madagascar, but culturally it's a really fascinating place as well. Although Madagascar's in the African region, the people there don't look African at all, and in fact they're not African in origin, right?
They're a mix of different sources. There's actually a lot of controversy in anthropology about exactly how people colonized Madagascar and when. I actually just heard something fascinating about this from Steve Goodman with the Field Museum. He said that there's now evidence that there were people here around 10,000 years ago.
No way.
Yeah, yeah. There's some ancient. I think there were bones of some of these extinct lemurs that have just unmistakably human tool scrapings on them. But there's this intervening period of thousands of years in which there's no evidence of humans on the island. So the theory now is that people went extinct on the island, that they'd colonized from somewhere and then went extinct, like the people on Easter Island. Was there some kind of ecological catastrophe? I think some kind of climate change is the leading candidate. But this field is still very controversial, and there's still a ton to learn. But the major arrival of people in Madagascar, it was Austronesian people who came from Southeast Asia, probably on sort of outrigger canoes, maybe with slightly larger boats. And somehow they made their way all the way across the Indian Ocean and colonized Madagascar, and then at that point found it largely or completely unoccupied by other humans, and then started colonizing. There's different theories about, was there a string of settlements, Austronesian settlements, all the way around the Indian Ocean that they used as stepping stones and colonized Madagascar, and then maybe those mainland settlements were wiped out and leaving only Madagascar? But nobody knows. It's a mystery, and people often call it the most astounding single fact in all of anthropology. The fact that you've got these Asian people in Madagascar, which is 200 miles off the coast of Africa.
It's incredible, and I think there's some linguistic similarities with Asian languages as well, right?
Well, unmistakable. I mean, I've been studying Bahasa Indonesian in the last couple of years, and there's tons of words that I find, I already know that. That's a Malagasy word. Particularly very fundamental things like the word for rock or the word for crocodile. It's boy in Bahasa Indonesian, and it's boy in Malagasy. I mean, it's unmistakably Austronesian, the language.
Yeah.
So since the Austronesian people arrived, there was a lot of colonization from Africa and lots of mixing. And then there were pirates. There were northern Madagascar was tied in with this whole sort of Arab trading world, sort of centered in Muscat in Oman, and the Sultanate of Zanzibar and that sort of world as well. So since then it's been this melting pot. But what's amazing is that on this big diverse island on which people have come from all kinds of places, everybody speaks Malagasy. Everybody speaks one language, and it's unmistakably an Austronesian language. It's adopted some words from other languages, but it's an Asian Austronesian language.
So within Madagascar, the people are sort of split into different tribes, yeah?
I wouldn't call it tribes in the sense that you have in Africa. To me, when you're talking about tribes in Africa, you're talking about people who are fairly linguistically differentiated, and I don't think the differences are that great in Madagascar, and they're usually not sort of self-described as tribes. But yeah, there are different groups that do speak slightly different dialects of Malagasy. In some cases, there were different historical kingdoms, like a lot of the west was the Sakalava people, and the Sakalava actually had and still have a king. So there were different political entities around the island, and there's somewhat different identities, but really,
but most people will consider themselves part of some subgroup of Malagasy, say, like Sakalavas or.
Sure, but I don't know that it's all that much stronger than like the UK, where you're clearly British, but you're also from Yorkshire.
You think? I would have thought of it as a little bit more more different than that?
Maybe a little bit more, but then I bet if you roll the clock back in the UK 100 years or 200 years, I bet it would be very similar. Like the identity is British, but then there were pretty strong regional identities and accents, and even different words, ways of using the English language. I don't think it's too different.
So when I started doing tours here, because as well as having this unifying language, Malagasy, it being a French colony, I would say most people speak French. Is that fair to say?
I would say that most people have some elementary understanding of French. I would say everyone who's well educated speaks French.
Will speak fluent French, yeah. So I always saw it, because I love languages, and I always saw it as a wonderful opportunity to sort of brush up on my French, and so I would always study French before I came for a month or two, and then I'd get a chance to sort of use my French during the tour. And I've been doing tours for about 10 years, and just in the last 2 or 3 tours, I started putting a little bit more effort into learning a few words of Malagasy. And I really wish I'd done it earlier, because although people are pretty friendly in general, but coming out with a few words of Malagasy really changes the way that people interact with you. You think that's fair to say?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, there's this idea that so the word for foreigners is vaza, and so your default vaza is French, and then the assumption of most French people here, not all, but most, is that okay, these people they're from a former colony of France, and they're going to speak French, and then you're kind of defying that expectation if you speak Malagasy.
Yeah, I mean, when I speak to people in French, they say, "Oh, we miss you," like that, and they kind of speak to you, but there's always a little bit of a sort of gap, or there's no real kind of camaraderie between you. But when you start to come out with a few words of Malagasy, the whole way people talk to you changes. They get a big smile on their face, and they're kind of almost amused that you're coming up with something, and they become a lot warmer. And I really enjoy now. I don't know much, but I'll sort of, because we always travel around with like a local guide, and the one that we often use is Ken's sister-in-law, who's a really fun person. But from her I'll just learn a new phrase every day, and then try and practice it a little bit with people, and you get a wonderful reception from people when you actually come out with some.
Yeah, it's definitely one of these places where learning a little bit of Malagasy, you get a huge amount of mileage from. And as you say, it just connects you with people more. It takes you out of this kind of post-colonial dynamic in a way.
Yeah.
We were talking about Thailand last week. And I think it's one of the things that's cool about Thailand is that it wasn't colonized. And I think it's part of why Thais are so welcoming to foreigners, is that they don't have this hang up over having been colonized, and then
chip on the shoulder.
And then which language are we speaking in? Are we speaking in our language or the colonizer's language? And all the associated baggage there. I definitely recommend anybody who's going to come to Madagascar, just invest a few minutes a day and learn 10 words in Malagasy, and it will just pay dividends.
And it's very culturally telling as well, and tells you a lot about the history. I mean, there's even like the greetings, like salama is a very... It's
Arabic.
That's a sort of Arabic rather than Asian, yeah.
One fascinating thing is that the greetings vary a lot locally around the island. The language as a whole doesn't all that much, but there's like where I live, you say bolatsara, which you've probably never even heard before. Yeah, it's a northern Madagascar thing. A lot of the coast people say salama. The highland.
I know manaon, I guess.
The highland greeting, right, is manaona.
Yeah, I like the how's it going, the inivovo, which you told me was like what's the news?
Yeah, that's it. What is the news? The inivovo, and then there's this ritualistic response, which is tsisvovo or tsimisvovo, which just means there's no news, and then that's always followed by the news.
So that's what I, instead of bonjour, ça va, when I ever meet a Malagasy, it's just salama and inivovo, tsisvovo. And that's very little to learn, but it just makes such a difference in how people respond to you.
In general, so people are quite nice in Madagascar, like Thailand, quite hospitable, and I don't know, people are very gentle in Madagascar, which I sometimes think there's this strange parallel between the nature and then the people. The environment is softer in a way than like on the African mainland. And there's a weird thing, which is that lemurs are matriarchal, so the females are socially dominant. And in Malagasy, human society typically is the same. The head of the family in any given family is the grandma or whatever. That's a weird coincidence, if it just happens to be that way.
Convergent evolution. But no, it's fascinating. It's fascinating culturally. Fascinating for wildlife. It's got a very sort of young population, right? One of the things you notice when you travel. So when you're on a tour, it's a big country. You often fly to a place and then sort of drive slowly back through all these different villages, whatever. And one of the things you see is just a sea of kids everywhere. Little kids everywhere. And with that, also, you've got this kind of population pressure on the environment, and there's a lot of conservation issues in Madagascar as well.
Yeah, there are. I would say that Madagascar has a very bad reputation as one of the world's ecological basket cases. Or I often hear people saying, "Oh, you better go see it now before it's all destroyed."
But a lot of historically, a lot of the forest has been cleared through burning, right? So burning forest to clear for. So a big part of the Malagasy culture, I guess, is keeping cattle, right?
Right. So cattle are sort of the currency. Even now, I mean, people don't have bank accounts. People don't have any kind of cash, but they have cattle. And that's so if somebody needs to go to the hospital or your kid is going to go to a private school and you need money, you basically sell one of your cattle. And then the money immediately goes to whatever use, and then so that has been the case for hundreds of years. That these Zebu cattle were the currency, and so on a big forested island you have limited cattle pasture, I guess, and so there was lots of burning, started to clear forest, and most of the central plateau, the high plateau, was cleared hundreds of years ago. So it's a weird place. You had a ton of environmental destruction a long time ago without any kind of industrialization, or you have places like the Philippines or Malaysia where there's horrible destruction of forest happening, but it's all very industrialized now, and there's large scale logging and mining, and here it's like artisanal forest destruction. Goes way back. Now it has continued in the modern time, but it's still very, very small scale. It's basically just people trying to survive and just clearing, 1 hectare and growing manioc and that sort of thing. It still isn't really happening on a large scale, like with big international companies, logging companies or whatever.
One of the things that's quite scary in this is that a lot of wildlife is quite sort of, it's got like limited distributions, right? That you'll look at. I mean, how many species of lemurs are there? There's a couple of about 100 or a little bit more.
Yeah, there's well over 100 now.
Yeah, so a lot of these have got quite small distributions, and you'll have something similar looking, and this area is this species, the next area is the next species, and so it's not like one species over the whole island. So when you get that burning, these little remaining patches of forest get smaller and smaller, and then these ones have got nowhere left to go, right?
Right. So in a way, Madagascar is cursed with this high biodiversity in terms of its being perceived as an environmental basket case. If the United Kingdom had Madagascar's biodiversity, it would have been like one of the greatest biological catastrophes in history, because virtually every square inch of the UK was converted to human use or changed in some way. And if you'd had all these localized endemics and just this incredibly high diversity overall on an island like the British Isles, it all would have been wiped out. And so Madagascar has around a third as many people as the UK.
Yeah.
So it's not overpopulated, and there's actually quite a bit of pristine habitat left, somewhere around 10%, 5 to 10%. pretty much untouched. So there's quite a bit of forest. There's been a lot of destruction. There's still a lot of pristine forest left.
I must say, in the 10 years that I've been going there, I have, we drive along we go to the same parks every time, we drive along the same roads, and I have noticed this kind of creeping destruction of the forest, or just kind of like these national parks being sort of eroded around the edges, like by burning, by cutting, by mixing with eucalyptus trees, whatever. So and it does worry me. It makes me wonder what's going to happen. Although you're still going to the same park, seeing the same things in the middle of that park, around the edges, I think the amount of habitat left is being eroded.
Yep, there's this creeping destruction of the forest, and unlike a place like the UK, you don't have reservoirs of other places that can recolonize, or where things can be reintroduced from mainland Europe or whatever. You don't have a lot of open country species that find any kind of alternate habitat once the forest is gone. So, yeah, it's I can see it from two different perspectives. I can see it's hyperbole to say, oh, you better go now, it's going to be gone in 5 years. Like, there's still going to be lots of forest here in 5 or 10 or 20 years, but the trend is bad, and there has to be some kind of solution here for the people to achieve some degree of prosperity, so that most of the population doesn't just have to scrape out a living on the land.
One of the sad things really is that the people that are often living around these national parks or places that we visit don't really make anything from it. That money that you're paying, like there's a few people that work as guides, whatever, but a lot of the people living around there don't really see much of that money that's being made through tourism.
No, I think ecotourism at this point is sort of the thin line of defense that keeps a lot of these places somewhat protected, but the proceeds from that are not shared with enough people. There's not enough stakeholders at this point. It's one problem, but I think ultimately ecotourism is not going to save a place like Madagascar. There has to be a larger scale improvement of the whole economy of the whole country.
Yeah.
Before, people pretty naturally start to care about the environment when they have a little bit of extra cash, and when they don't need to worry about, am I going to be destitute when I can't work in the rice fields anymore? Or I think you've seen that in Thailand. Like, people start to care about the environment when they have a certain level of prosperity. They start having fewer kids because they don't need to have 7 kids in the hopes that one makes enough money to sort of look after them in their old age. And so that's what I think longer term needs to happen in Madagascar.
Maybe you can explain why, because Madagascar is like one of the poorest countries in the world, right?
Right. It's consistently ranked in the bottom 10 in terms of wealth.
But when you go there, you're driving along these roads in the bus, and you see people just working their butts off. They're working in the fields. They're incredibly hardworking people. And they're incredibly productive. They there's wonderful like local industries of weaving or carving or making things, or they're very productive and they're very hardworking. So it's with people like that, you'd think they'll be sort of pulling themselves out of it. But maybe you can. Why do you think they're still one of the poorest? I
mean, there's so many positive things in Madagascar that really should add up to booming, or let's say budding prosperity. As you say, people are super industrious, and it's a big island that's in a pretty good position geographically. It doesn't have any insecure land borders. It doesn't have any terrorism of any kind. It doesn't have any real tribal tension or internal problems. Almost every single mainland African country has some kind of problem between different groups with very different languages and cultures. You don't have that here. You have tons of arable land. You just very, very rich land. You have lots of mineral wealth, even oil. A lot of oil has recently been discovered in the Mozambique Channel offshore.
And the average wage in Madagascar is so low that you think this would be a perfect place to invest in and make industries and stuff like that.
Right, like has happened in a place like Bangladesh or Sri Lanka. That's often seems to be these days the sort of the stepping stone to greater prosperity is manufacturing. I think the obstacle at this point to that happening is shipping. You have to be able to ship the stuff around the world in a timely manner and without tons of obstacles, corruption, getting stuff in and out of the country. And then the other major obstacle is you need to have a good power supply to do any kind of heavy industrial stuff. And the power has to be relatively cheap. And so none of those things is the case here.
I know there has been a lot of, political problems, coups, and what have you. Even I think one year we were there and there was some demonstrations at the same time going on, and then there was years where there was a lot of instability and there was very few tourists went. So it hasn't been the most politically stable place for the last decade or so.
Yeah, a lot of that is really because of external forces, let's say. Bigger, more powerful countries messing with Madagascar's politics. And so people often ask, what can we do to help this country? And I think spreading the word about just what it is, what it has, its incredible biological diversity, and then also just scrutinizing what's happening here. More people across the international community basically keeping an eye on what's happening here. And in a lot of these colonized places, there's been this kind of tacit understanding that the former colonizing country can do whatever it wants in that, it's still part of their sphere. And that, I won't go into great detail, but that hasn't been a very healthy situation for Madagascar. And I'm afraid if that goes on forever, that most of Madagascar's biodiversity is going to be wiped out because, the current economic trajectory is not sustainable for the people or for the nature.
Are you worried at all about the complete lack of, eco-tourists for a year? And do you have any feel what's going on with the exploitation of wildlife and stuff like that while there's no eco-tourists there?
Yeah, I mean, we chatted about this a little bit a couple weeks ago, right, when we were talking with Keith about post-COVID travel. I'm very concerned about it because I saw almost all the sophakas at Ankarfanska get wiped out a few years ago during a period when nobody was coming, no tourists. I'm very concerned. I haven't heard anything. I haven't seen anything. The national parks have been closed now for 6 months. So let's see what emerges as they open back up.
Yeah, it's a worrying place. I mean, it's just got amazing potential. I think when you compare it to somewhere like in the same region, like Mauritius or like other places that receive a huge amount of foreign tourists, it's actually quite low still, and it's really got a lot to offer.
Absolutely. I mean, right. In mentioning the country's potential, I didn't even mention tourism, but it's got insane tourist potential. You've got nature, you've got world-class beaches, snorkeling, diving. You mentioned, Mauritius gets more than 10 times as many tourists annually on average than Madagascar.
Island.
And it's a little island. The forest is completely destroyed. It has nice beaches, and it has a whole lot of sugar cane. And basically, I guess it just has pretty slick infrastructure, and it's on the map for tour companies and stuff. There's lots of flights, but it's crazy that you get 10 times more tourists in Mauritius than Madagascar. Madagascar has probably 10 times more stuff to see than Mauritius, if not more.
Wow. So you've mentioned some of the things you like about Madagascar. Are there any bits about the culture or the country in general that you don't like?
Yeah, sure. It's a tough place to live in some places. Like some of the stuff you mentioned in South Africa, just the inefficiency of getting things done in government offices, or let's say sending things around. There's plenty of hassles and frustrations. You and I have often had this conversation about how hippies don't last very long in Africa. It's you don't want to just become totally cynical, and on the other hand, you also have to kind of buffer yourself and just not worry about some of the stuff too much. And so it's kind of a tricky thing to navigate. Keep your optimism about some things getting better, but then also just to keep enjoying what's good about things now.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I firmly believe is that less developed countries have a huge amount to teach the rest of the world about how to live and how to be human. And it's really not much appreciated. But I learn a lot from just seeing how people are here, just like their stoicism and their ingenious ways of reusing and recycling things.
Yeah.
We make this big deal out of doing that in the West and feel very virtuous about it. People do it here just out of absolute necessity. And that's true of a lot of things. Just the way people live here, in some sense, is much, much more sustainable and ecologically healthy, even though, of course, the population growth is unsustainable long term. So there's a lot to be learned here. People's expectations for just how much they're going to have materially is so much less. And, that's the direction we should be moving in the West as well, instead of just always wanting more.
Now that you mention a sort of ingenuity and stuff like that, when we do our tours, sometimes we visit places where they make handicrafts and things like that, and we visit a few of these workshops. One of them makes these little miniature toys, like little miniature bicycles and little miniature cars and things like that, and they're all amazingly skillfully made by little bits of fishing wire and line and little Coke cans and all sorts of other stuff. And you watch how they make these things, and it's really impressive.
One thing I'll mention that's maybe a frustration of living in a place like Madagascar is I will always be a foreigner here, no matter what. So it's not a place that's going to ever integrate outsiders. You mentioned that briefly about Japan as well. It's people can be really, really nice. They're probably nicer to me because I'm a foreigner, but I'll always be a foreigner. Yeah. And so that's something that can be hard for some folks to take. I guess I'm used to it because I've just been a foreigner wherever I've been for 15 plus years. I'm used to that. But living in Madagascar, it wouldn't be for everybody. It's pretty tough in some ways. Yeah, it's not like I'm recommending people come retire in Madagascar or something.
I see myself as a person that could live most places, but I think knowing it well. I mean, I've spent probably 9 months in this country, and I think it would be a little tough on quite a lot of levels to live. But there's a lot of cool stuff there as well. It's an incredibly cheap place for some things, not necessarily for doing tours or whatever, but just buying things in a market or whatever, it's pretty cheap, eh?
Absolutely, yeah. And just overall, the cost of living is pretty cheap, and just amazingly good produce and meat and things like that are just remarkably affordable. I mean, stuff I could absolutely never afford living in the States or even in Thailand or Taiwan, places like that. I mean, when I was in Taiwan last year, I remember going to a big supermarket and just looking at the prices of fish. It was just unbelievable. It was $40 a pound for this, and it was, I would just never eat fish at those prices. And here I'm basically buying incredible fresh fish for $2 a kilo or something. It's just.
I know one of the nice things that so Ken is up in Diego, and they have one of the nice things they have, especially at the time we often do tours there, are the mangoes. And there's a lot of nice mangoes, nice and sweet, around that time. But Ken always brings a big bag of these Diego mangoes, which are these just absolutely like small yellow mangoes, and he brings a bag down for me, and that's really one of my favorite bits of coming to Madagascar now is just getting totally sticky and chowing down on a bag of Diego mangoes.
It's funny, it's very localized to northern Madagascar. I've never run into those mangoes anywhere else in the world. I don't know why they're not more widely cultivated, if there's something tricky about it or what, but Thai mangoes are good, but I think Diego mangoes are better. Yeah,
fantastic. Anything else you want to mention about Madagascar? If anyone's interested, I definitely do recommend they check out Ken's virtual tour on Madagascar, because you'll get a really nice feel for the place and lots of pictures of the wildlife and videos. So I definitely recommend that.
Yep, that's been my most popular virtual tour. It was the first one I did.
Yeah.
It might be a little bit technically rough, but people seem to really like it. I just wrote a long article about Madagascar for Birding Magazine, ABA's magazine.
Oh, right.
And that's going to come out early next year. So that'll give you a really thorough overview of all the different groups in Madagascar.
And what about your? Were you not writing doing a sort of photographic guide to the birds of Madagascar?
Yep, I'm working on a photographic guide. That's also going to be with Princeton, and hopefully that'll be out next year.
Cool. I'm looking forward to seeing that.
Well, I feel like we could easily do another episode on Madagascar, Charlie. I'm sure we can do another one on Thailand too. I mean, we've talked a lot about the nature and not all that much about just life here and sort of how people are. It's just a very, very different place in every way.
One of the things that strikes me when because you have these, because it's quite a big country, and to visit a few of the different areas, you've got to do these quite long drives. And then you spend the whole time just sort of gazing out the window at sort of life going on and all the rice fields. And a lot of the houses are these sort of 2-story kind of brick structures, and they're very sort of picturesque.
Extremely. I mean, to me, the Highlands are like going back in time. It's like time travel. It's like the Middle Ages. It's like ox carts and 2 or 3-story red brick houses with these little round tiles. And I mean, there's virtually no evidence of it not being 1500.
Yeah, it's amazing. But it's just fascinating to just look out the window at life going on. But yeah, really, really fascinating place. I think it's definitely a bucket list destination for a lot of people, and it's really, couldn't recommend going there more strongly.
No, it's well worth it. I mean, there are challenges to the trip. It's definitely a trip you want to do and maintain some mental toughness. Like, I'm going to be through some tough stuff. There's long drives, and people often have stomach upsets just because I think the flora and fauna here is so different. But if you come into it with the right mentality, I mean, it's a place you have to see as not just a traveling birder, but any kind of naturalist, or really anybody who likes to travel and see a lot of different places.
Saying that, people might think that the accommodations are kind of rustic and the food's kind of basic, but the hotels that we often use now are they're very comfortable, really look quite luxurious.
Luxurious, I think is the word. Yep.
Yeah.
That's right.
And the food as well is an extremely high standard. So it's not like you're exactly roughing it, but there are a few things to endure or I think it's funny about the sicknesses, because everybody tends to sort of get sick for like half a day, some kind of little stomach upset, and then they're good for the rest of the trip. It's like something you almost have to go through. Vaccination
or a rite of passage.
Yeah, most people, that's about the most serious thing that's going to happen to most people is just. Yeah,
it's in no way dangerous, and you're staying in remarkably luxurious lodges. The food is amazing. I mean, a lot of people have told me it's the best food we've ever had on a birding tour, which maybe that's not much of a compliment, but I do think you get decent food on a lot of birding tours, and Madagascar has amazing food. I think often what's hard about this tour for people is that they've just never been to a country that is this poor. If you look at the list of like the bottom 20 poorest countries in the world, nobody goes to those countries except for Madagascar. I mean, most of them are war-torn, literally war-torn. A lot of them are in northern Africa. It's a remarkably comfortable place to go considering how poor it is, but it's kind of shocking to the system just to see what poverty looks like. It can surprise people. It can jar them. It's so that I guess what I mean by the hardship of Madagascar is that more than any real physical like danger or discomfort. But by the same token, I think it's incredibly valuable just to experience a place like that and think about how many people in the world live in conditions like this, and then also to note how happy they are and like how resilient they still are.
I wanted to say. Yeah.
And you discover something essential about humans. It's not all grim and miserable and horrible. Some aspects of life are super tough. But
this is a big lesson that I learned. One of the biggest lessons that I learned traveling. And the place that I learned it first was probably in India. When I went to India, I was sort of preparing myself for this, to look at this level of poverty. And I thought, everybody's going to be miserable and poor. And I got there. Everybody was so poor, and they were just so happy. And I thought, what is going on here? I come from the UK, where people are often pretty miserable, especially in winter. And then they have so much, and they're often complaining about just nothing. And then people, are there getting on with their life in Madagascar, incredibly poor, but sort of connected to the things that really matter in life, and they're extremely happy, and they have their family around them and doing what they need to make ends meet.
I mean, every time I visit the States, I'm just astounded by how unhappy people seem. And, maybe it's hard to judge that. It's hard to judge whether people are really happy or not. And often I think people here maybe are putting a brave face on lots of desperation. Sure. But it is striking. I fly into New York City or something, and after being in Madagascar, I'm just wondering, like, how did everyone get so miserable? Like, what went wrong here?
Yeah.
I guided a Ghana tour once, and Ghana's a bit more wealthy than Madagascar, but not a whole lot.
Yeah.
But we were in a little village up in northern Ghana, which is a pretty poor part of Ghana, and birding around some little villages and just seeing kids running around and stuff. And one person on the tour said, "Oh my goodness, these poor children! I just feel so sorry for them. I just can't imagine what they deal with." Which, okay, there's some truth to that. But she sort of walked away for a minute, and then another guy on the trip, I guess he'd had a tough childhood in the U.S. He was American, and he'd been bullied a lot, and he just turned to me and he said, "I would have loved to grow up here." And that really
brilliant,
really made me think.
But I think the Western idea about wealth and poverty isn't always 100% applicable. I was also in Ghana once, and somebody looked out the window in this little village, and there was fruit trees everywhere. The kids were playing in the street. There was like a little basic school. People were, farming. And he looked out the window and said, "This poverty is miserable." and the people were just running around happy with their families. And I was like, is it really? If you have should we be pitying people that lead a simple life and a subsistence agriculture or whatever? I don't think that putting everything into dollar terms, all these people survive on, $1 a day or $2 a day. If you have a house, you make your own food, you have your family there, there's some kind of education, there's some kind of health system. It's not. I don't think we need to pity people for having a low dollar per capita income. I don't think that's always the correct way of evaluating societies.
No, I totally agree. One of the things I often tell people about Madagascar, just to help them understand what they're experiencing here, is that in America, for example, in most Western countries, the biggest fear is to be poor.
Yeah.
In Madagascar, the biggest fear is to be alone. So as long as you're never alone in life, you're fine. And so it's an entirely different paradigm for judging value and what's important in life.
Yeah. Okay, I think maybe we'll call it there. Call it a day. I think we've had a pretty good chat about Madagascar. We said, Ken and I were saying, what should we talk about today? This is just before the podcast, and I was like, I don't think we're gonna struggle. This could go on for hours and hours. So keeping it just to an hour is really using a bit of self-restraint.
Indeed. No, we should return to Madagascar, there's interesting lessons in a place like Thailand too. It's way, way wealthier than Madagascar, but it's also a pretty different lifestyle. And so that could make an interesting podcast at some point. It's just comparing lifestyles and sort of priorities around the world. Be an interesting chat to have.
Yep. Okay. Do you want to tell us about our natural sound that we're going to play out with?
Yeah, I'll explain this a little bit. We talked about lemurs. One of the more odd and distinctive lemurs is the Indri. It's actually the biggest living lemur. It's kind of like a big black and white teddy bear. It has a little bobtail, and they sit up in trees and they look down and they eat leaves. But they have an incredible voice, which it's like part howler monkey, part whale, part gibbon. I mean, it's just got this crazy voice. Hearing these things,
it's one of the most amazing natural sounds in the world. Really, it's incredible.
on tour, when we're usually walking around, we're looking for Indris, and we hear some, and people say, "Oh, they're right over there. We're really close." And I say, "Nope, those are 2 miles away." When you're close to these things, they are just ear-splittingly noisy. So
yeah.
we're going to play the call of Indri, a troop of Indris, as our natural sound.
Awesome. So, thanks, Ken. Thanks for sharing your thoughts about Madagascar. It's an amazing place. I can't wait to get back there myself. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening.